Why my friend trying to have an emotional conversation with me this early in the morning? Girl.
All right, let's do it again.
Steve,
I'm trying to do too much. That's
yeah,
why.
you're talking. Just say, as
I know,
usual, the world is burning. And I'll be like, that's right.
Sunday. What's the deal?
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 Yo, what's the deal?
What's the deal?
What's the deal?
Hey, what's the deal?
What's good, everybody? Steve Discourse.
What's up, y'all? It's your girl, Jay Calli.
Back with another episode of What's the Deal? You know the world is burning and spinning out of control, so we're back again to try and make some sense of it.
That's right.
Okay.
This week on the show, we're going to be talking about the government, which is temporarily reopened. 3 weeks, y'all.
Back in business for
That's right.
now. Of course, we're going to talk about the shooting in Florida at the bank. We've got, what else?
We got an interview coming up with the amazing Brandon Frye. He's an educator here in the district.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Can't overstate that.
I cannot wait.
So that's going to be an excellent interview. Following up on our series, continuing our series on education in depth. You guys got to stick with us and make sure you're keeping tabs on all of these. We got more coming up in the future. So we're also going to talk about a little bit about the announcement of Kamala Harris's campaign.
Thumb up, thumb down. Who knows?
We're going to find out. And let's start with this real quick. Last week on the show, we talked about Mayor Bowser in D.C. vetoing council's move to decriminalize fare evasion. And just a quick update, we don't have to do anything more than say this. The council then went back and overturned her veto. So if you don't know what that means, you can go back to last week's episode and hear about this issue, or you can just rest easy knowing that I think the right thing happened.
I agree. Now I can ride for free, guilt-free. It's a double whammy.
Okay, now you're going to have to go back and listen to the episode because that just made it go totally left. Yeah.
Sorry.
You cannot ride for free. Despite this shining example of morality and responsibility on the side of me from the desk. So okay, but we're going to talk about the government shutdown, or the lack of now.
That's right.
But real quick, what do you got about this Florida shooting?
All right, y'all. This past week, there was a 21-year-old man. His name is Zephin Xavier. Ask his mom why. I don't know. He went to a bank. The reason is unknown. He just decided to open fire. He shot and killed 5 women, execution style. And then he called the police on himself and just said, hey, I just shot 5 people. I'm in the bank. I guess I don't know if he wanted to be arrested or if he was bragging. The reason why he decided to call and tell on himself was unclear. When the police arrived, they found all 5 women laying face down with gunshot wounds in their backs and in the back of their heads. He could be some crazed maniac who targets women, or it could just be ironic that all of the victims were women. I just don't understand what would make somebody want to go into a bank and do something like that and then tell on themselves.
Yeah, I mean, there's investigators haven't really released anything to give us a better understanding. So as it stands, I mean, he just went crazy, and I don't want to say just went crazy because he's had a history maybe of violent thoughts and ideas and things, but
so when he was in school, he apparently has gone to his school professional counselor a few times, and it was sent further into professional counseling for saying, I go to sleep at night and I dream about shooting my classmates. Oh, when I fall asleep in school and take naps, I'm dreaming about committing a mass shooting at school and killing all my classmates. And people were like, okay, we need to do something to help you. Here's the shocker, an interview with his father, and his dad's like, oh my God, I don't know why Zephin would do this. He's such a great kid. He's never ever hurt anyone before. I'm so shocked that he would go to the bank and do this. It's like, dude, he's been dreaming about mass shootings for years, killing his own classmates. Why are you shocked? Yeah. This sounds like enabling behavior. Like, you ignored the warning signs as a parent. You're like in denial. This is how mass shooters are born. I'm so confused.
I mean, it's hard to say where that sort of fault lies as a parent, because I imagine it's hard to acknowledge that about your kid, but at the same time it seems like he has a well-documented, like, explicit history of not just kind of seeming like dark and violent, but like really vivid imaginations about these things.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, he has been taken in. So.
And one thing I got to say, because this is front and center on my mind while we're recording this, is there was a stretch last year when week after week we had to talk about a new mass shooting.
Oh my God!
And it's weird that while we're talking about this, I also feel like a sense of, it's almost relief that like it's been a long time since we talked about it, and not relief that it happened, but like the weight of it kept building and building week after week back in 2018 when these were just like one after the other. So I mean that's all we've got about the shooting, right? Essentially.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there was
more to come.
Details are more to come. Right now, he's being held without bond. They went to the bank. He was there wearing a bulletproof vest. He was willingly went in when they arrested him. You know, they're not clear if it was a robbery or not. They're still trying to figure it out. But I'm sure all those details will be coming out throughout the week, and hopefully we'll have an update on the next episode.
Yeah, and noticeably, maybe because there's a lot of other news going on that's taking precedent, but we haven't been having a national discussion about gun violence or mental health in response to this. And I mean, yeah, like you said earlier, it's interesting. Did he target 5 women, or was this just a matter of circumstance that there happened to be several women on hand available? I don't know. So we'll just have to keep an ear out for that.
All right. So what you got? You said the government is back open. What's going on with all that, man?
It's back open temporarily for 3 weeks, roughly 3 weeks, until February 15th. So this is kind of a complex issue. We've talked about the shutdown in other episodes, but we don't talk about politics on the show a lot. You know, the negotiating and the back and forth about how politicians actually get work done and what's going on behind the scenes. But in this case with the shutdown, I think it's really important to kind of get an understanding of how it's all unfolding, why, and who are the major operators, right? Because this issue affects all of us in very real ways, and understanding how and why and where we land on the debate is reliant on what we actually understand about how it's unfolded, right? So what I did is I reached out to our policy and politics expert, Jim Becker. He's out in Seattle. And I know anytime something's going on with legislation, I know anytime we're debating an issue, if there's legal language, if there's documentation, he's the guy diving in. He's reading it, right? A lot of us, we're relying on the news and the reporting and everything secondhand in a sense. This guy goes straight to the source. So I spoke to Jim yesterday on the phone, and I basically asked him, what's the deal with this agreement? Break it down for us, and this is what he had to say.
So the agreement is that they will fund the government at the levels they previously agreed to in December through February 15th. The Senate in December, just ahead of the shutdown, passed a bill pretty much unanimously by voice vote, and then they sent that bill to the House. Paul Ryan was still Speaker at that point. He did not take it up, and that's why we're in a shutdown. A lot of people have forgotten about that. But the first thing Nancy Pelosi did when she became Speaker was to take that bill up and pass it and send it back to the Senate. And at that point, it was Mitch McConnell who decided he didn't want to touch it. And so we've gone through, 30-some days of shutdown, all this misery and all this cost and all this pain. And we're right back where we started, being that the Senate now has agreed to go ahead and pass that same level of funding.
How's that back where we started?
All right, so here's how it's back where we started, and some of that might have been a little hard to follow the back and forth. So before the shutdown happened, Senate passed an agreement to keep the government funded. It has to go through both houses of Congress. It went to the House of Representatives, where Paul Ryan, the Republican leader, said, we're not going to even debate this. We're not going to take it up. So it died there before it even got to the president to be signed. Now, when Nancy Pelosi became leader of the House, taking over after Paul Ryan as a Democrat, she said, boom, I'm going to pick that same thing up. We passed it. The Democrats passed it in the House, sent it to the Senate, and Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, said, we're not going to take this up. We're going to leave it right there and let it die. And that's why we're at the shutdown. So that's how we got to the shutdown, was with Paul Ryan letting it die. When the Democrats took over, the Senate said, we're not going to take it up either. But this is the same agreement from back then,
right,
is what they signed now to temporarily hold it open. And that agreement would have kept us open till almost the same time that this new temporary one is going to keep us open. So all that shut down, and we literally passed the exact same thing to keep the government temporarily open. So I asked him, I said, all right, well, if those are basically the same, last week on the episode, we were recording right before Donald Trump went to speak, and he basically went on TV, offered all these concessions and compromises, you know, to negotiate and get something going. So I asked him about that. I said, what's the deal with all that stuff Trump promised?
This DACA thing is a self-made crisis. Trump ended DACA unilaterally out of the blue in 2017, and he basically said Congress has 6 months to figure out a solution to this, and just sort of threw it in their lap. Fast forward to now, you know, he's always tried to hold DACA out as a carrot, because he knows that the Democrats and some Republicans do want a permanent fix for DACA. What he offered last week on Saturday was a temporary 3-year extension for DACA. But when you go in and dig into the actual legislation, you see that it actually doesn't do anything with DACA. It creates a whole new program that's similar to DACA, but has a much more narrow focus. It puts a whole bunch of new fees on, all sorts of things that are pretty cruel to do, and pretty counterproductive when you think about how everyone wants a permanent fix for this. The same thing with asylum. There's a lot of asylum restrictions. It basically changes the way that we do asylum in this country, and it also takes the whole asylum process out of the courts and away from takes away the right for counsel and puts it into the hands of DHS. And there's no judicial review of any kind of their the way they handle the asylum cases, or the way that they process things. So you think about the way that they've handled family separation. They've been real dicey about it. They've been real dishonest about it. You think about the fact that 2 small children have died in their custody. I don't necessarily think it's a good idea for them to be handling this with no judicial review or oversight at all.
Okay, so basically what he's saying, right, is when you come to the United States seeking asylum, you're a refugee. That's normally for lack of a better word, this might not be perfectly accurate, it's kind of a legal issue, right? It's a not a legislative, but a legal issue, right? So we assess your claim and we decide what to do. By putting it in the hands of Department of Homeland Security, DHS, it becomes more like a law enforcement thing, which is, as he referred to, all these camps and separating children from families and everything, and the cages and the 2 children who died. That's the problem that he's seeing, is it becomes a law enforcement, a crime kind of aspect, rather than having people look at these claims and say, okay, just from a kind of a logical standpoint, is this a valid claim or not? So it really kind of dehumanizes the situation. So I said, okay, if all these things aren't really compromises, then what are these proposals that were voted on Thursday that failed? Sum it all up, right? We've got this temporary agreement for the funding, and then we've got these proposals that failed, and all these ideas that Trump has put out into there. Just sum it up. Where are we actually sitting in this moment?
This bill this is twice now that they've done something that they've tried to sell as something else, and as a compromise. So Trump can stand up there and talk in broad strokes about solving this problem and giving people what they want on the other side. But it's such a bad faith move that, he's basically just lying to people. And then his people are going to the Hill and writing this bill and throwing all kinds of stuff in it that he knows are not going to be acceptable to Democrats and some Republicans. They lost 6 Republicans on this bill when they tried to vote for it yesterday. So I think he wanted to win the optics there. I think they've been just very concerned about optics about this, and not really concerned about reopening the government or actually solving this problem. And that's where you don't end up with anything. And today we see it. We didn't end up with an accomplishment of any kind, and we're back where we were. I think this is what happens when you have someone running the government who has no idea what they're doing.
Boom. He just said it full out. It sucks so bad to hear someone say so clearly, like, all of this was a waste of time. All of the struggling, all of the, the shutdown, the furlough, just so that it could look a certain way. People's lives have been, like, in shambles for over a month because of nonsense. All of this was nonsense.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate again, like, the bill they passed to temporarily fund it could have been passed in December and avoided any shutdown at all.
Right.
And that makes it even worse. And me and Jim talked for a while, and there were so many gems that he dropped, but we just don't have the time to get into it all. Right. So super shout out to Jim Becker for taking the time.
Thanks, man.
And for being our analyst, our expert on politics and policy. So that's where we are with the government for now. More to come, obviously. We might be facing this again in 3 weeks.
While we're on this break, we want to remind you, do not forget to share the podcast. Share it to all of your social media platforms, your Facebook, your Instagram, Twitter. Don't forget to use the hashtag #What'sTheDealPod whenever you share anything. And like and subscribe the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, wherever you listen. Thanks for spreading the love. You know we appreciate you.
Last story before we get into our interview with Brandon Frye. What do you got about Kamala Harris?
All right, y'all. So this past Martin Luther King Day, Senator Kamala Harris announced that she will be running for president in 2020. And I got to admit, when I first heard the news, I got really excited. A lot of people just went up like, woo, Kamala Harris running. If you're unfamiliar with who Kamala Harris is, she is a black female senator who is also an HBCU graduate, Howard University. Shout out, y'all. And she's just kind of, people know her around her. People know her face. She's done things. If you haven't dived into her policies, then you might think that, like, oh, she's this amazing woman. That's where the record kind of scratches. After she announced her candidacy and that she was going to be running for president, people were like, oh, let's really see what she's about. Like, yeah, that's my girl right there. I thought she was my girl. It's crazy how we don't know anything. It turns out she's got some rough history, y'all. She's got some rough history. People are not digging her. Black people aren't digging her. I don't know how other Democrats feel about her, but I know black people ain't digging what she's got going on. In the past, she's been the district attorney in San Francisco. She's also been the attorney general for the state of California. And some of her policies have been really not progressive. She's promoted some things such as she was against the legalization of marijuana, which was a big one, which seems like a small deal. But when you think about the fact that so many African-American men are sitting in jail right now for the use of marijuana, when like everybody just freely kind of uses it, it's a racist policy. And to not see that, people wasn't into it. She's also perpetuated lots of other tropes that have landed people in jail. She didn't dive into police violence and police brutality when she had the opportunity to investigate it as the district attorney. She kind of turned a blind eye to what was going on in the name of saving face for herself, which kind of feels like a sacrifice of all the people who were murdered at the hands of police brutality or wrongfully convicted.
So like she didn't want to rock the boat politically speaking for herself? Is that the idea?
Okay. She didn't really want to get into it, and it makes you question her motive, like why? Yeah. Especially when you've been known to like prosecute people themselves. People who have been prosecuted when they were actually innocent, she was against, allegedly, okay? She was against investigating further and then releasing those people once they've been found out to be innocent. She was kind of just like, oh, well, okay. I mean, they're already in jail. It's not that big of a deal. She didn't fight to have those people released. It's just so many ways to squint your eyes at her. A lot of women are upset with her currently because of her non-progressive stance on like sex work. She's had a lot of things to say about like human trafficking, which, okay, we talked about this a little bit a couple weeks ago, knowing the difference between sex work and human trafficking and kind of labeling it all as human trafficking and not understanding the difference. She's prosecuted a lot of sex workers. They've been in jail literally for selling their bodies. She's taking down those types of web pages and just not progressive when it comes to like what women's rights are with their bodies. She was against the use of police cam footage. She did not want police to have to wear police cams, which is just like But the whole reason why we ask for that is to hold them accountable. So first, you don't want to investigate them. And then you also don't want to hold them accountable for their actions. And you yourself have prosecuted lots of black men and women. We're really questioning who you are and what you stand for and what your policies aim to do for the people. Because it sounds like you've got a lot of like self-promoting that you want to do, or self-preservation.
So this is interesting to me because this is a story I was aware of, you know, through looking through my feeds, maybe reading a piece or two here. And at first glance, for me, it was a case that I think happens a lot now in a lot of the left-wing type of political circles that I'm in, where sometimes if a candidate isn't perfect, like that one scratch mark against you is kind of like toss the whole candidate out. And that makes me uncomfortable at times. But, you know, given everything that you laid out, I think it's not just, oh, she did maybe something that we don't like as a prosecutor, but there's a lot of issues that touches on.
A lot.
I think those are worth considering, to be honest with you.
They are. And you know what? I have 2 points to make with that. The first is, yes, people are quick to get rid of their candidates for like a small infraction on their reputation or in their policies. And I think it goes beyond the way that we view our candidates for potential whatever role, whether it's presidency or not. We're in a big cancel culture. Someone makes a mistake and it's like, ooh, they're canceled. The first time it's like, ooh, cancel that person. Stop playing their music. Don't watch any more of these person's movies. You got to scratch them out. If you have a post about them on your social media, you need to delete it because they're canceled. And if you still stand behind them, if I catch you promoting anything they do, you're canceled too. That's just the culture of 2019. That's just what people do.
Yeah, and so that it's a challenge to decide where that line is between understanding ambivalence and understanding people aren't perfect, and taking a person as a whole despite some of the negatives. And I mean, it's a valid challenge, I think. Sometimes I think maybe we are a little too quick on the trigger.
Very much so.
But again, like I said, at first glance, I thought that was maybe a case here. But the way you laid it out, I think there's even more reason for this to be a very serious conversation to have, and not to cancel her candidacy overall, but because she's going to run, right? She's going to run.
Yeah.
So as this goes on, I think those are super valid concerns to have.
There's definitely some substance behind what's happening. So, you know, and my second point, because I know I said I had 2, is that I think she's starting to kind of realize where she stands in the eyes of like African-American voters, because we have a very delicate situation where we have to figure out who do we want to represent us as a people, because it doesn't matter what we all are doing. There's always that representative, and we have to be aware of that. People are going to look to them and say, oh, that's what black people are doing now. And so what she started doing is kind of what people say is pandering for the black vote. There's pictures of her out doing like the Wakanda salute, like, ooh, Kamala for Wakanda. And it's like, okay, all right. Another video of her dancing to a Cardi B song, like trying to be hip, and kind of really leaning on the fact that she's an HBCU graduate and that she's an AKA, which is like a black sorority, to pull in more black voters. But people are saying you're leaving out lots of other African-American people, and people who might be your supporters are not graduates of college or an HBCU at all. They're not members of a sorority, and you're really pandering to that crowd, or also people who are kind of like woke, this woke crowd. It's interesting to see her doing that, a black person pander to a black audience, because it's not something that happens very often. So it's just, I'm curious to see how she's going to rebrand herself to be more authentic, to be more genuine, and to kind of be more woke and progressive, to make people say, all right, maybe she's not all that bad, because it's not looking good for your girl right now.
Interesting. And it all changes when you go from being in your Senate seat and grilling people and doing those right things to now you want to be a candidate in a larger sense for the whole country.
Exactly.
So now there's higher scrutiny, obviously. So all right, that's something to keep, we'll have to keep having these conversations as candidates arise.
Right.
So, all right, we're about to get to the Brandon Frye interview, but I just want to address one thing real quick. There were 2 stories that came across my radar this week. One is Florida Secretary of State Mike Erdle was forced to resign after photos of him in Halloween many years ago, dressed in blackface. And we've talked about this in the past, so okay. but dressed in blackface and wearing a shirt that said read Katrina victim on it.
Not
and funny. That is just like egregious in a way. Like, it's unprovoked, and it's very petty. And I mean, we've had a national dialogue for a long time after Katrina about what happened, you know, good or bad, on purpose, not on purpose, you know, whether people were inept or whatever it may be. The other story, also in Florida, was because I know a lot of people. I used to live in Miami, so my social networks around us. There was a man in a town in Miami called Brickell, and there was an altercation, and he started just hurling racial insults at his victim, and then he came out later to apologize, to say, "I'm not racist." You know, Secretary of State Mike Earl, same ideas, like, "Look, I'm not racist, this and that." And I just bring this up because I want to say, people get the misconception that if you're labeled a racist or accused of racist or something, it means like you just walk around with hate in your heart, spewing insults and attacking people all day like it's what you live and breathe it. But it's not. It's important to understand that being racist is the potential at any moment that you may use that as leverage against someone in a hurtful way, in a violent way, at the drop of a dime. You don't know when it's going to happen. This man is walking down along his night. He gets in an altercation, whether it was started by someone else or by him. It doesn't make any difference. He knew, boom, in his mind, this is something he uses, a weapon in his arsenal. Flip side, Mike Earl, completely unprovoked mockery of what victims in Katrina went through, and making it specifically about black people, and that's just a really unnecessarily brutal and unprovoked insult to make. And this is the nature of it, right? You don't have to be provoked about it. You just, it may pop up in your life at any given moment because you know in the back of your mind there's a go-to.
Right.
In conversation, in confrontation, anywhere. And that's what it's about. That's what being racist is about. It's not even maybe in the back of your mind having a snap judgment about someone across the way, but it's about knowing better, and to say, you know what, I don't know that, you know, I'm guilty of it. I might walk down the street and I may see someone and I may think of something about them based on how they look, but it's a matter of checking yourself sometimes. And what we see time and again when we have these cultural, like, viral issues of racism is it's people routinely having no filter and knowing that this is a go-to that they can use to inflict violence or pain.
Yeah.
And that's what being racist is about. It's not about a whole lifetime, a resume of being a terrible fucking person. It's not that. It's just about at any drop of a dime, you can go to it.
It's so boring and it's so easy to be racist. I just wish that people would be mean better. Like, if you want to be hurtful, do better. You're boring me now.
Right, step your roast game up.
Step it up. Like, you're whack.
Right. So I just had to put that out there because I think that's a misconception, and I just wanted to put that in your mind for people who don't understand, for people who feel threatened sometimes, right? Yeah. As white people, we feel threatened. We hear accusations or whatever, and we think, well, I know a guy like that, or that's me, or right, you can see yourselves, and then you get defensive. That's what it's about. And until we start understanding this and reflecting inwards about it, things aren't going to get better, because I'm going to leave it right there. So look, we're going to take a break real quick, and we've got, like we said, this amazing conversation with an educator based in D.C., Brandon Frye. And this is a conversation with two educators, because our very own education expert, Jay Calli, is always in the building. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be amazing. You don't want to miss it. What's good, everybody? I'm Steve Discourse.
What's up, y'all? It's your girl, Jay Calli.
Back from our break. What's the deal? This is the deal. We got Brandon Frye. He is a D.C. native. He's a middle school math and computer science teacher. We wanted to bring him on, following up our last conversation with Anthony Tillman, and really following up on all the kind of educational topics we've talked about on this show, because we realized they need like a deeper, we need to kind of dive a little bit more deeper, maybe be a little systematic in how we're approaching this to really give people the important information that we want to learn. So welcome to the podcast. We appreciate you coming in.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start. The focus on this conversation is, and of course, we got to remind everybody, Jay Calli is our resident education expert.
That's
because
right.
she is as well a teacher. She is elementary teacher, right? So today we want to kind of focus on the teacher's perspective from in the classroom and kind of get at the big issues you guys face, good or bad. And so let's start with this. As a teacher, anybody would just expect, okay, there's content that the kids need to learn.
Right.
And you can't have the kids acting wild and doing whatever they want, so you got to be a little bit of a disciplinarian. Mm-hmm. That probably is what a teacher is, but I know you guys do so many other roles and hats that in a lot of ways are legitimate other in standalone professions. So I want to talk about that in addition to teaching and just kind of keeping the kids in line. Brandon, what do you have to do on a daily basis?
Well, just the beginning of the day, my day starts off with me being a nutritionist first. In Ward 8, it's a food desert, as we all know. So the students come to school and they're eating chips and they're drinking sugared drinks. And, all those things don't set you up for success throughout the school day. So I try to bring fruit, granola bars, any kind of thing to kind of stimulate them so that they can have a positive effect on their learning. And then just dealing with that. You have to be a social worker in a lot of instances. In Ward 8, we all know that is the lowest socioeconomic ward in Washington, D.C. So there are issues that go on that affect student learning, but it goes on outside of the classroom. For example, I had a student whose father was murdered in front of the school, which it was very triggering for him to always be there, and there were no systems of support for him when he would have a moment. He was 12 years old. His mom is my age. I'm 26. And he had to essentially become the man of the house. And that's something that isn't built into the curriculum. That's something that you kind of have to hone in on and get to know the person first and meet them where they are and try to see where it is that you can help them out so that they can ultimately be successful. And then, you switch hats. Sometimes you're the big brother. Sometimes you're the loving father figure, in my case, being a male. And these are things that aren't taught in college. These are things that aren't taught in the curriculum. They're not in the lesson plan. These are things that you have to have as a human being when you're teaching younger people.
Jay Calli, how much of that sounds familiar to you, and do you have any other perspectives and roles you want to add into that?
Yeah, it all sounds familiar to me. I also teach in Ward 8, so a lot of his experience kind of mirrors the experiences that I've had. I haven't always been an educator in Ward 8. For the past 5 years, I taught in Northeast Washington, D.C. This is my first year teaching down in Anacostia, and it is shocking, to see the difference, because going into education in D.C., I was like, okay, it's Washington, D.C., it's impoverished children, you know what I mean? It's kids who are of low socioeconomic statuses, but yes, the Anacostia area does suffer a little bit more than the rest of the city, and the difference is noticeable. Having to go in and get to know kids first. You want to go in and say, all right, let's get to know these standards. Let's break down the content. Let's dive into the curriculum.
Let's teach.
But let's teach. But realistically, you can't expect to just dump all this information into the mind of a child who's struggling to eat, who's starving, whose parents are being killed outside the school. None of my students' parents have been, killed outside the schools, but I have had instances where parents were fighting right outside the school, in the middle of the school day, during drop-off and pickup. That's traumatizing to kids. Like, I can't go to a space and feel safe where kids are fighting, parents are fighting, in some instances, teachers are fighting. You know what I'm saying? Realistically, that's what's happening in some of these areas. So you have to get over the burden and the hurdles of just life before you can even get into curriculum. I don't care. Your brain physically cannot learn when you're under pressure, when you're under stress. It doesn't fire the signals that it needs to lock in the information. You can't process it. It's not possible.
And then when you think about the sheer, just on a human level, he was 12 years old, and me at 12, I couldn't fathom going through life. Dad's been murdered, and essentially I have to be the man of the house. I have 3 other younger siblings that I can't be a regular 12-year-old. I can't hang out with my friends after school. I can't go to the store or go play basketball because I have to make sure that they get home, that they're fed while my mom is working overnight shifts, and then she comes home and she's dead tired. So, I just think that in education, especially in urban education, that you have to first lead with compassion, first and foremost, and understanding.
Yes. You know what? Something that we do at the school that I teach at, because I can say my school acknowledges that you have to get to know the person first. So with some of the kids who struggle, the teachers have like a schedule, like a rotation where we go and we call it banking time, and we just go grab that kid out of the classroom. Mm-hmm. Let's just take a walk. Let's have a conversation. What's going on? How was your school day going? What's going on at home? How are you feeling? Did you eat today? And we're just, the purpose is relationship building, because we acknowledge that I can't teach you if I don't know you. I can't teach you if you don't trust me, or if you think the only thing I care about is your test score. I care about you as a person first and foremost. So that's one of the things that we try to do to combat it. And, we recognize that it's small, but it can have a big impact of how they perceive school and how they perceive us as people who they spend 9 hours or more of their day with. So, that relationship is so crucial to being able to teach, especially I teach in an elementary school, small children.
Right.
Yeah, and for me, I don't have any level of trauma like that to relate to, but as far as, this idea of you taking the banking time to really make personal connections, for me, I was pretty low-key in school. I didn't get in a lot of trouble, but I didn't participate at all either. I was like, how many classes can I fail? Because I'm fine going to summer school, right? And I need a D because I can't get an F because I got to graduate. That was me in high school. That was me in high school. It was bad. But on that same note about building personal connections, my relationships with most teachers was they are here to teach you the stuff and keep you in line. Yeah. And since I wasn't out of line, I was just kind of floating there on my own a little bit. And so there was no meaningful relationship interactions to maybe help engage me, to make me care, change my mind or whatever. And it's not like I was a dumb kid, and it's not like a lot of the kids you deal with are dumb necessarily. It's a matter of motivation or priorities and things like that. Because I went on to college to be an honors student, which was my choice several years later, right? So I appreciate that idea of understanding that you have to kind of cater to the full child, but but that's a whole nother level of training and sensitivity and experience that you guys, as you said, aren't prepared for in the training and in college when you're getting your certifications and everything, right? So that's a lot.
And that's what's happening in front of kids. That's what's happening during the school day. A lot of people, if you're not a teacher, you really have no idea of what goes on those professional development days or on those after-school meetings. Talk about being a social worker or being a nutritionist, but also talk about having to be a fully trained data analyst. Yeah. We are diving into numbers as if we went to school and studied STEM. I feel like an engineer sometimes. Whoa.
And my major in college was biomechanics, and sometimes when we are there in those professional developments, I think that's something that should really be restructured, and it should cater to what's going on in the school at the time. When you have so many things, like you said, parents fighting outside of the school, parents coming up to the school to fight students in some regards, you have brawls breaking out. Yes. I think that that professional development should cater to more so to how to keep the school better than, hey, let's look at this data, or hey, let's talk about park scores, or do you have all your grades in? Things that are not necessarily relevant to the overall culture of the school, which, if that is positive, it can reinforce student learning.
So stepping back a little bit from, because that was a lot. All of this trauma and lack of support, maybe is a good way to also put it, that adds these hats and roles that you have to put on. But stepping back from that a little bit, just in classroom management specifically, are there anything, what kind of challenges do you face in just helping the kids get to the content and making them understand that?
I think it starts with the culture that you set. So me, at my school, they call me Joe Clark sometimes. Okay. I'm a nice guy, but, when it comes to my students, I believe that it was an old proverb that one of my teachers told me, if you treat someone as they are, they will remain as they are. If you treat them as what they could or should be, then they will ascend to that level. In my classroom, I like to have signs up, just like positive affirmations of when you step into this classroom, I expect nothing but your best and excellence. And if you can give me your best, then we can work on that. But I tell my students all the time, I can't teach effort. You have to be able to meet me halfway, but also have to be able to meet you where you are as well. Story, last year when I taught 6th grade, I had a student come to me on a 1st grade math level. And how he was able to get passed through is another story.
Right.
But when he left me, he was on a 5th grade math level, which he wasn't on grade level, but that growth was what I cherished the most, because he was really struggling, and he would break down and cry in class, and just had to have that positive affirmation, motivate him and say, it's not that you can't do it, you just have to be willing, you just have to have the effort. That's it. And you have to have a stimulus to motivate you, and that comes from the teacher.
I was about to say that the kid has to be motivated, like they have to want it, but the person who's in front of them making them want it is crucial. Yeah.
And so how do you deal with disruptions and problem behavior in the classroom? Knowing what you know about some of the outside issues that are going on behind the child's,
So for me, if I ever have big disruptions in my classroom, I like to have conversations with that student. And it just simply starts with what's going on. And that's it. Talk to me, because I teach 8th grade, which is a bit different than elementary school, where they can actually, in a lot of cases, verbalize what it is that's actually wrong with them. And, sometimes, they don't have the emotional intelligence or emotional stability, and that's understandable. Me at 13, I don't think I had it either without all the trauma that they deal with. So I kind of try to, lean forward with understanding and compassion first, before I don't get into screaming matches. It's not something where I'm a dictator and you're there and you have to listen to me because I'm an adult. At the end of the day, we're both human beings. And on a humanistic level, I want to see what's wrong with you first. And then we can, talk to whoever we need to talk to, or find a viable solution. And if that solution is, something happened at home, you didn't eat, or you got into it with your mom, or anything can happen. And by you telling me, now we know where to go and the process and the route to take.
Okay. And Jay Calli, for do you have a follow up for him, or I was going to ask you about younger kids, but
I mean, it's both. You'll be surprised how well a 2nd grader is able to articulate what's going on with them. Like when they're freaking out, they don't know how to express it, but they typically know exactly what's wrong. So like I have a similar approach to you. Like I'm not going to be like, oh, you're tripping, oh, you need to do that. I'm going to be like, are you okay? Sometimes it's a double, sometimes it is a backhanded comment that I'm making, like, are you okay? But I also mean it, like, are you okay? What's going on? And they might say, can I talk to you about something? And they'll say, this morning on my way to school, my mom, we had an argument, and I was really upset. And then when I got here, this kid said that, and now I'm just frustrated. And, like, they can articulate why they're on the edge. And I'm like, okay, so what can we do to make this better? There are, of course, those moments when the behavior is extreme and a consequence has to be issued. Like, just because you told me what's wrong doesn't mean you're not still going to get in trouble. Like, you're not going to hit anybody. You're not going to throw a chair in my classroom and not be in trouble. But I do care about why you did it. So let's fix the root of the problem. You're going to serve this consequence because you need to know it's not acceptable in my classroom. And then we're going to move on. You're going to learn.
And that's a life skill.
Yeah.
But so it helps to explain to them why, not just hit them with the stick and say that was not wrong, that was not the right thing to do. But so you're saying it helps to explain, because they'll understand that better.
It helps to explain to them why, but it also helps to just listen to them. Like, why would you do that? Because they're not doing it because they're mad or because they're mean or because they're bad kids. It's always something. It's always something. These are children. We can't forget that these are kids that we're talking about. I want to know why you did it first, and now let's figure out what's moving forward, what's about to happen. You're going to understand why you're not going to do that again.
And then when you think about it, it's like if they're so used to someone just coming at them in a certain way, berating them, badgering them, screaming at them, and you just simply say, what's wrong? A lot of instances, that just throws them off. They're like, oh, like they really want to know what's wrong with me. They're not screaming at me. Maybe I should talk to them. So I think that helps out a lot in the classroom.
Okay, that's fascinating. I'm wondering, as I'm listening to this, how generational it is, because I know, like, my folks are in their 70s. They're old,
That's
so they're
true.
older than a lot of parents of kids my age, but that was more of like a disciplinary time back there.
Yes.
And it's fascinating I mean, that's something larger than we need psychologists and sociologists to come in the room to understand that dynamic. So let's not get into it.
One day I called my grandma and I was telling her about the behaviors in my classroom, and she was like, "Well, do you whoop them?" And I was like, "No, I don't know what happened to you in school, but I don't whoop kids because I will lose my job and go to jail. We don't whoop kids in school no more, Grandma. What you talking about?"
And yet, Grandma came out fine, right?
She sure did.
And the kids that she whooped maybe came out fine too.
Me.
Right. Yeah. So like it's really, I don't know. That, like I said, that's a conversation for another time with maybe a different panel of experts about why we can have such negative reactions to things like that. But technically those people came out all right too. So I don't know. Then you got helicopter parents. All right, let me not digress.
Oh my God, Steve.
So last question I wanted to pose to you guys is, we've talked about what's going on outside that's informing these kids' behaviors and their perspectives. We talked about what you guys are doing in the classroom to address that. What do you see is a major challenge or changes that are needed at institutional level, whether it's that at the school level or a city, county, state, federal policy level? Is there anything? Because Brandon, when we met last week to talk about this topic, you mentioned some interesting things, and you don't have to go off of these specific if you don't want, but one thing you mentioned was, if it was up to you, you would front load your school with more social workers, because that's, as you've already demonstrated in this conversation, that is a big need that these kids have, that you as a teacher are doing instead of teaching math. So what kind of institutional and policy things are on your mind? Obstacles, challenges?
I do think that there needs to be more social workers. I don't think these are the exact numbers, but I think there's like one for every 257 students in DC, which when you see the socioeconomic issues that go on here and the trauma that they deal with, that is just not a conducive ratio. The numbers just don't add up with that one. I also think that more people that make the decisions need to be people from the classroom. If you look at the State Board of Education in DC, I believe there are only like 3 of them that were actual teachers. And, they're making these decisions, but they don't have the experience of being in the classroom. And then that trickles down to, I think, administration. We need more teachers to become administrators. My administrator at my school, for example, she's a lawyer. She's never taught. She's a lawyer. I don't know how charter schools operate, but they hired her off the strength of that.
That's how they operate.
Okay. But, she's a lawyer, and she has no sort of, doesn't really know what she's doing in, running a school.
Mm-hmm.
You were at my school last week, and you saw towards the end of the day how chaotic and how hectic it could get. And, I think that if she had more experience in the classroom and more compassion for the teachers, then the school it would snowball to the students, and it would be better overall. It wouldn't be such a toxic environment at my school with the administration.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, given depending on what type of law she studied, that could either inform or reflect aspects of her personality that now translate into this completely different field of expertise. So yeah, that's interesting. Do you have anything to add to that, or your own perspective?
Yeah, I have a particular perspective because I'm currently in training to become a mental health counselor, and I want to serve in school settings. But I think something that would really change the way we combat social issues and, issues of trauma in schools is if people took the time to know the difference between a school social worker, a school psychologist, a school licensed counselor, and a school counselor. Like, those are all 4 different jobs that I think that people try to roll into one way too often, especially in the school system. Right. Like, a school will feel like, oh, we have a social worker, now they don't have a counselor. Or, oh, we have a counselor and a licensed professional counselor, so we don't have a psychologist or a social worker. No, when you're working in a city like Washington, D.C., especially in Ward 8, where there's poverty, there's trauma, there's starvation, there's so many things going on that need to be combated, both inside and outside of the schools, you need a full team, a full mental health team. You need a full social work team to effectively be able to combat the type of issues that we're facing. So having one social worker that serves 3 campuses for one organization. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not even one social worker at each school. At the charter schools that I've worked at, the social worker will serve at all of the campuses for that school organization. So it's ridiculous to think that their caseload is just too much, and the kids are falling between the cracks. And frankly, a lot of the issues are not being addressed.
Yeah. So how do you serve any one of them adequately if they don't have the time, as you were mentioning, to just spend and pull one kid aside and really get to know them and understand
for
them
more than 10 minutes
I mean,
a week?
Yeah. And again, my similar but not in my experience, my guidance counselor at the high school was the only experiences I had with him was that picking classes for next year once a year, and then maybe another visit during the year, but probably not. But it was very disconnected. And one thing that strikes me really is for the senior yearbook, they were like, okay, what are your plans? Because in your picture we're going to put like what college you're going to or whatever. And at the time I had hoped to, with the help of a teacher who actually did take the time out to kind of connect with me personally, I had hoped to get into an electrician's apprenticeship. And I told them that. I told the guidance counselor that was the goal, right? And they put on the yearbook undecided. Oh wow! And I was and I was like, that's not exactly the same as what you're talking about, and certainly not to as deep a level. But it just speaks to even at my school, and where most of the towns and most of the students were not coming from as much trauma or other stress as some of the experiences you guys have. He wasn't even connected at that level, right? At this supposedly good school or with good towns or kids like that, and then we kind of had mixed socioeconomic backgrounds at that school because it was 3 towns coming together. And I know I came from the poor town or whatever, quote unquote, right? But so I know kids from our school in different ways were subconsciously or directly kind of discriminated against, or just under why am I blanking on the word? They didn't get the same benefit of the doubts in potential or as far as problem behavior and everything like that. And so I'm just imagining in schools where a lot of these problems are even more acute and more strong, that lack of staffing becomes even more concerning. And so last thought on my mind to put to you guys is, in these situations that you're teaching in, how balance this out. What if I said, okay, given all the issues that kids are facing generally, what if the schools just took a step back from the actual content of any given class and focused more so on just getting them mentally, emotionally prepared for life, and maybe the actual lesson plans were sort of back burner? Aside from the fact that schools need to be evaluated and meet standards, would that be like an interesting strategy for you guys to say, look, the kids have a lot going on, let's try and teach some math, but the first thing we need to do is make sure they're straight and good so that when they leave here, at least they can function and engage socially?
I think that's good. I think there should be, like, at my school, we had it last year. It was an SEL block, which is social emotional learning, on Wednesdays. So we would take that time and teach some either coping, or we had an hour where they would have the kids do yoga or different kind of things to kind of help them cope. I like to introduce different things in my math lessons that kind of help them out. So I don't know if this answers the question or not, but when I teach my students in Ward 8, I live in Ward 2. I'm not rich, though.
Where's Ward 2?
It's Logan Circle area.
Oh, okay.
Sort of like by Howard, where it costs $1 million to live now. I lived there in the 90s when it definitely wasn't that much.
Yeah, really well.
So what I try to do is teach my students that you can dictate to your circumstances and make it in spite of your circumstances through my lessons. I don't, I still teach standards, but, a big project that I did last year with them was we talked about gentrification, allocation of resources between Ward 3, which is probably the most wealthiest ward in D.C., and Ward 8, and kind of just taught them how, you can make it in spite of your circumstances.
Wait.
But
I'm sorry, you're a math teacher?
Yeah.
6th grade?
Well, I taught 6th last year. I did this with them last year.
Can you explain this project? What you talking about gentrification as a math teacher with 6th graders?
I was thinking
I'm really curious.
I
what is
know
this?
about
We
this.
were doing unit rates, ratios, and percents. And I had talked to my instructional coach. I don't know if I can give her a shout out, but Miss Shantae Fontroy, she hired me. So
go girl.
I love her to death. She's Black girl magic all the way. And I went up to her and I just said, these standards, I said, can you let me teach it the way that I can and help them to understand it and teach life through math? I said, and if you can let me teach it, they will be able to learn it. And if they don't, then hey, I tried. So when we did that, I just had a thought in my head. I said, well, I'll just make the project about DC because it's rapidly changing. So when we did percents, I did percent increase. So we looked at the rent costs from the 90s to now. And I would show them how to do percent increase with mathematical formulas. We did unit rates. We compared, I think it was teenage centers. So like in Ward 3 and Ward 2, you have teenage centers everywhere. And in Ward 8, you have probably like 3. We compared food deserts. So how come there is where I live at now, there's a Harris Teeter, there's a Whole Foods, there's a John, and everything else organic on every single block. But where I teach at, there's a Popeyes. The healthiest thing around is MLK Deli. Shout out to them. There is,
and they do a lot of good work.
They do a lot
community.
of good work in the community. They actually fed my students when they painted the mural.
Go ahead.
But we talked about murder rates. We talked about prison rates, and we did all this. It's all public information. I just looked up graphs, and I kind of didn't want to overcomplicate it, so I made everything from scratch. I just looked at the information and made everything, and we looked at juvenile rates. We looked at, like I said, murder rates. We looked at everything else. It encompassed DC and the change that happened. Like I said, we looked at gentrification because it's a big thing that's going on right now and how everybody is getting pushed out. And they see it now because it's starting to hit Ward 8, with the St. East being built, those apartments there, the rent price going up. A lot of families are now getting pushed out of Southeast, which is like the last domain of Chocolate City that we have. And through that, the Washington Informer came and did a piece with my class, and they were able to talk to my students to kind of hear them out and hear their voices, and that was a really good thing to give them that exposure to let them know that in Ward 8, there's still greatness here, and it doesn't matter where you come from. You have the ability to dictate to your circumstances.
Give this man an award, somebody.
Can we clap?
I mean, because I'm just thinking
that
about.
That sounds intense.
I mean, I'm thinking about conversations about. I've seen states or school districts in the headlines recently, like passing financial literacy standards, and I'm just thinking, I'm listening to you, and I'm like, we can probably just do this all at once.
Can you teach me? Can I get that class?
I did that too when we did when we did expressions, for example. I was giving them how to calculate interest rates. Because the formulas are really basic. I don't want to sound like a math professor or math guru, but they're really basic. You just input the numbers. So I taught them how to calculate interest rates. We did a balance and checkbook activity because I want them to know. They always ask me, we did integers, so like negative and positives, withdrawals, deposits, balancing the checkbook.
You come up with this?
Yeah, I come up with everything on my own. So, I just believe in, they always ask me, and I love when they ask me this question, how will this help me in life? Well, and that's why I have these creative
Help
things.
them in life and teach them at the same time.
Yep.
Wow.
They're like, where will I use this again? I'll be like, okay, well, here you go.
Instead of having 2 battles, learn the math, and
so I always end it with the project. Every unit is always circled around the project.
Okay.
I would be so happy to be in your class, but I feel like I would also be so scared to be in your class. Like, we're going to learn what?
Yeah, it's always, it's something, yeah.
And it's
wow. Here I am teaching kids how to count on their fingers.
Well, 2nd grade, 6th grade, different.
You help me out, because when they get to me,
I got
they
you.
know.
Anything parting on your mind, Jay Calli? Any last questions, unresolved issues, ideas?
I want to just kind of touch on the question that you originally asked about
the institutional changes.
Yeah, and just emotional management. Because you say, what was it called?
Social-emotional learning.
Yeah, I think that would be a really great idea to implement. Like, schools are very afraid to put learning and to put academics on the back burner, because I think that's what you said a little while earlier.
Right.
I think that it's a beautiful idea. I don't know realistically how would that look in Washington, D.C. schools, because everybody's under a lot of pressure and a lot of stress.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like the principal is just like, I need test scores. No, there's someone on top of the principal. There's someone on top of that person who is like, show me the numbers or you're not getting funded. Show me the numbers or those kids are going to have to go. So if you really care about the kids and you think that you're going to do the best for them, you want to keep them. So you kind of have to follow some rules, even though they're ridiculous. And the best way to change it is to really get into policy and be like, nah, this isn't what's going to happen. Because like he said, we need a lot more educators in policy. We need a lot more educators in those leadership roles who are making the decisions about what that looks like, because the kids do need emotional learning and not 5 minutes a day of teaching a new breathing strategy, but like we really, we got to get to the root of the emotional and mental health issues in order to effectively teach these kids and prepare them for college or trades or wherever you aspire to have your children go.
Okay. This was awesome. We've gone like twice as long as we were aiming for, but I mean, there was nowhere I could stop it that I would have felt comfortable, because this was really, really some amazing conversation here. So, Brandon Frye, sixth grade math and computer science teacher in D.C., born and raised. He's doing a thing. Look for him to maybe be Secretary of Education in the future.
I'm looking out for that.
Thank you, God willing.
And Jay Calli, of course, thank you for your contribution and your experience to this conversation.
I'm here every week.
And that's going to do it for this episode. Follow us on Instagram at Steve Discourse. You want people to follow you on social media or anything?
Sure. My Instagram is Professor Frye. Professor's abbreviated, so it's PROF.FRYE.
Okay, cool. And
it's Jay Calli.
Okay, so also anytime you're thinking about us, anytime some post that you post, was inspired by us or some thought crossed your mind, even if you're out partying or something, just tag us, hashtag us, What's the Deal Pod. Just hashtag it. Get it out there, and you will help us grow our family, and we can keep bringing you these amazing conversations. So, everybody, thanks for tuning in. That's the deal.
All right, people, thanks so much for tuning in another week. What's the Deal podcast?
You can follow us on social media
at Steve Discourse.
And you can catch Jay Calli at
It's Jay Calli, ITSJAYCALLI.
We got to send a big shout out to Clifford Cartel for composing our theme music. And wherever you're listening to this, make sure you subscribe.
Family, subscribe.
Write us a review.
Share the podcast. Subscribe to it wherever you listen.
Share it with your friends, family, your loved ones. Heck, give it to your enemies. We don't care. Help us spread the word. We truly appreciate it.
With Steve Discourse and Jay Calli. With Steve Discourse, and you already know your girl, it's Jay Calli.
And then say one more.
With Steve Discourse and me, Jay Calli.
With Steve Discourse and Jay Calli.